be me, not some main character, just background NPC energy. Clock in at an office job that won't impress anyone at a party, but it keeps my bank account from flatlining. Crash in a 2-bedroom place that costs more than it should, but at least the neighborhood doesn't feel like a mistake after dark. For the last couple of years, I was living there with my girlfriend, Aisha. When we first met, things were great. As they always are, I guess. She was smart, funny, passionate about her beliefs. I liked that. It felt like she had a strong sense of justice, of what was right and wrong in the world. But over time, that passion started to feel less like it was aimed at the world, and more like it was aimed directly at me. Every day became a new lesson, a new lecture, a new examination of my behavior that I didn't know I was taking. It started with small things. The way I loaded the dishwasher, for example. I had my system, she had hers. My system was apparently a subconscious attempt to force her into more domestic labor because I wasn't arranging the plates in the most optimal, space-saving way. I just wanted the dishes clean, but it was never that simple. It was a whole discussion about invisible work and the mental load. I remember having some of my old college friends over one evening, Peter and Koa. We were just sitting in the living room, talking, having a laugh. At one point, I said something like, "All right, guys, who wants another drink?" The moment they left, Aisha sat me down. She explained that my use of the word guys was exclusionary and problematic. I was confused. It's just a way of talking, a colloquialism. Nobody felt excluded, but she insisted it was a microaggression that reinforced a patriarchal default. My friends never came over much after that. It just got awkward. I started meeting them out, which led to its own set of problems. If I came home smelling of pizza and fun, I'd get the cold shoulder. It wasn't jealousy in the typical sense. It was more like I had escaped the plantation for a few hours and was being reminded of my place. She never raised her voice. That was the thing. It was always this calm, condescending tone of a teacher disappointed in a slow student. It was exhausting. I used to build models, intricate things like ships and airplanes. It was a hobby I'd had since I was a kid. It required patience and a steady hand. It was my form of meditation. When we moved in together, I had a small shelf where I kept the finished ones. At first, she said they were interesting. A few months later, she started referring to the shelf as your collection of war machines. She would casually mention articles she read about how such hobbies were rooted in a glorification of conflict. Then it became a joke when her friends came over. Oh, and this is Jimmy's corner of toxic masculinity. They'd all have a little chuckle. It stopped being relaxing. I started to feel embarrassed by it. One weekend, while she was out, I carefully packed all my models into a big storage box and put them in the back of the closet. When she came home, she noticed the empty shelf and just said, "Oh, good. It looks so much cleaner and more adult in here now." She didn't ask where they went. She didn't care. She had won. My video game console was next. I didn't even play that much. Maybe a couple of hours on a weekend with Koa online. For her, it was a symbol of male escapism and an inability to confront real-world responsibilities. It didn't matter that I paid my half of the rent on time, every time. It didn't matter that I did the grocery shopping and took out the trash without being asked. Playing a game for an hour meant I was regressing into a state of adolescent irresponsibility. The console ended up in the same closet as the models. The apartment started to feel less like my home and more like her curated living space that I was just allowed to exist in. Her books were on the coffee table. Her art was on the walls. Her throw pillows were on the couch. My stuff was in the closet. Even the way I sat became a problem. This brings me to a few months ago. The day it all changed. I came home from a long day at work. My back was sore. I just wanted to sit down and zone out for a bit. I sat on the couch, leaned back, and just relaxed. Aisha walked into the room, stopped, and put her hands on her hips. I knew that pose. It was the "I'm about to explain one of your many deep-seated character flaws" pose. I braced myself. She told me I was manspreading. We were the only two people in the room, on a couch that could comfortably seat four. I had my legs parted, I guess. I wasn't measuring the angle. I was just sitting comfortably. She said it was a physical manifestation of entitlement, a way of taking up more space than I was allotted. I just looked at her. I didn't have any fight left in me. I told her my back was sore, and this was a comfortable way to sit. This was apparently the wrong answer. My physical comfort was irrelevant. The symbolism of the act was the important thing. The conversation spiraled. It went from how I was sitting to how I never truly listened to her, to how I was resistant to personal growth. She claimed I was embodying the very toxic masculinity she was fighting against every day. In our living room, on a Tuesday night. I was tired. So deeply tired. That's when she pulled out her trump card, the one she must have been saving. She stood up and delivered a speech. It was about how she needed a partner who was on the same journey as her, how my unwillingness to change was holding her back emotionally and intellectually. She said she couldn't live like this anymore, in an environment where her concerns were dismissed. And then, the grand finale. "I'm going to leave for 15 days, she announced, her voice full of theatrical gravity. "I'm going to stay with a friend. You need this time alone. You need to sit in this apartment and really think about your behavior. You need to understand what you're going to lose." She stood there, chin held high, like a queen decreeing a punishment upon a disobedient subject. She was expecting a reaction, begging, pleading, a desperate, "No, please don't go, I'll change." I think in that moment, something inside me just broke. Or maybe it was fixed. I looked at the life I was living, the constant walking on eggshells, the hobbies I'd abandoned, the friends I barely saw, the endless, draining lectures about my very existence. And I pictured 15 days without it. 15 days of silence. 15 days of peace. It sounded like heaven. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I just looked at her, and after a long moment of silence, I said, "Okay." The single word hung in the air between us. Her smug, righteous expression just melted. It was replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Okay?" she repeated, as if she'd heard me wrong. "Yeah, okay. I think that's a good idea," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. I stood up from the couch. "Do you need help packing a bag?" The shock on her face was something I will never forget. It was like her entire worldview had been short-circuited. This wasn't in her script. The man was supposed to grovel. The man was supposed to recognize his failings and beg for another chance. I wasn't playing my part. She stammered something about how I clearly didn't care, that my lack of a reaction proved her point. I just shrugged. "You said you're leaving for 15 days. I'm accepting your decision." I went into the bedroom and pulled her small suitcase out of the closet. I opened it on the bed and just stood there, waiting. She followed me in, completely disoriented. She started packing, but her movements were jerky and uncertain. She kept looking at me, expecting me to crack, to finally show some emotion. I just stood there, a silent, unmovable object. I helped her carry her bag to the front door. She put on her shoes, still looking at me with this wounded, confused expression. "So, you're just going to let me go?" she asked one last time, a final bid for the reaction she craved. "This was your idea," I said. "I'll see you in 15 days. Have a good trip." She stared at me for another few seconds, then seemed to realize she wasn't going to get anything else. She opened the door, turned, and left. The door clicked shut. I stood in the hallway and listened to her footsteps fade down the corridor. Then there was silence. a profound, beautiful, all-encompassing silence. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch. I spread my legs as wide as I comfortably could, and I just sat there in the quiet for a very long time. The first day was weird. I woke up, and for a split second, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, the preemptive tension of waiting for the day's first critique. Then I remembered. She wasn't there. The knot dissolved. I made coffee. I left the spoon on the counter. I didn't wipe up the single drop that spilled. It was glorious. I walked around the apartment, and it felt huge. It felt like mine again. Later that day, I sent her a text. Just one. "Did you get to your friend's place okay?" It felt like the decent thing to do. A couple of hours later, I got a one-word reply. Yes. No warmth. No questions. She was still in punishment mode. She thought her coldness was affecting me. Little did she know, it was a gift. That night, I called Peter. I explained the whole situation. The fight about manspreading, the 15-day ultimatum, my reaction. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then I heard him trying to stifle a laugh. Then he failed. He burst out laughing, a loud, genuine, gut-busting laugh. "Dude, you finally did it," he managed to get out between gasps. I couldn't help but smile. It felt good to hear someone react that way. He said he and Koa would be over the next day. He told me to prepare for a decontamination protocol. The next day, I decided to do some reclaiming. I went to the closet. I pulled out the big storage box. I unwrapped my models, one by one. The ship with the intricate rigging, the fighter jet with the hand-painted decals. I cleaned the shelf, which had been empty for nearly a year, and I put them back. I stood back and looked at them. It felt like I was rescuing old friends from a prison. Then I went back to the closet and retrieved the game console. I hooked it back up to the TV. The startup sound was like a long-lost song. I spent an hour just updating the system and re-downloading a few games. The apartment was starting to look like my home again, not just hers. That evening, Peter and Koa arrived. Peter was carrying a stack of pizzas. Koa had a case of drinks under his arm. "The cavalry has arrived," Koa announced as he walked in. They stopped in the living room and looked around. Peter grinned when he saw the models on the shelf. "Look at that. The fleet has returned." Koa saw the console hooked up to the TV and let out a cheer. "He's back! The boy is back!" It was a bit dramatic, but it felt amazing. They saw me. They saw the parts of me that had been sanded down and packed away, and they were happy to see them again. We sat on the floor, ate pizza directly from the boxes, and played games until 2 a.m. We were loud. We yelled at the screen. We talked trash. It was juvenile. It was unproductive. It was perfect. We didn't talk about Aisha much. We didn't need to. The entire evening was a celebration of her absence. At one point during a lull in the action, Koa looked around at the pizza boxes and empty cans. "You know," he said, "this place hasn't felt this relaxed in years." He was right. I wasn't on edge. I wasn't monitoring my words. I wasn't worried about using the right coaster. I was just existing. I was just having fun with my friends in my own home. After they left, I surveyed the mess. There were crumbs on the carpet and empty boxes on the coffee table. Normally, this would have been a source of extreme anxiety, a mess I would have to frantically clean up before Aisha saw it to avoid a 30-minute lecture on respect for our shared space. But now, I just looked at it and smiled. It was the debris of a good time, a sign of life. I decided to leave it. I'd clean it up in the morning. I went to bed that night and slept more soundly than I had in years. There were no critiques replaying in my head, No anxieties about what I might do or say wrong tomorrow. There was just peace. A quiet, simple, and utterly wonderful peace. The first few days of my 15-day sentence felt more like a parole hearing that had gone surprisingly well. I fell into a new routine. A non-routine, really. I'd wake up, make coffee, and just enjoy the morning quiet. I'd go to work and actually feel focused. I hadn't realized how much mental bandwidth my relationship had been consuming, even during the workday. I was constantly running a background program, anticipating the evening's potential conflicts. With that program shut down, my mind felt clearer. One afternoon, a colleague I didn't know very well asked if I wanted to grab lunch. Normally, I'd have made an excuse. A lunch out could be misconstrued by Aisha as me avoiding coming home or spending money frivolously. It just wasn't worth the hassle. This time, I just said, sure. It was a totally normal, pleasant lunch. We talked about work, sports, a new show everyone was watching. It was a simple, low-stakes social interaction, and it felt like a revelation. I realized how much I had curtailed my life to fit into the narrow, approved parameters set by Aisha. The isolation hadn't been an accident. It had been a strategy. Her strategy. A few more days passed. Day 5, maybe day 6. I got a text from Aisha. It was a link to an article. The title was something like 10 Ways Men Emotionally Invalidate Their Partners. There was no other text, just the link. I looked at it for a second. The old me would have read it immediately, would have studied it like a textbook, trying to figure out which of the 10 I was guilty of, preparing my defense. The new me just deleted the message. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired of it. It was the same old song, the same attempt to frame me as a broken thing that needed her to fix it. I didn't reply. The lack of a response seemed to bother her more than an argument would have. A day later, another text arrived. I guess you're not even going to read it. That proves my point. I stared at my phone. It was a perfect trap. If I replied, I was engaging in the argument. If I didn't reply, I was proving her right. I realized that the only way to win was not to play the game. So I didn't. I just put my phone down and went about my day. That weekend, I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off. Our second bedroom had become a sort of storage room for things that didn't have a place. Her old workout gear, boxes of books she'd already read. I wanted a small home office, a place where I could have a desk and my computer, where I could work from home without being in the middle of the living room. I had suggested this idea once, months ago. It had been dismissed. She said my desire for a separate workspace was rooted in a capitalist impulse to turn the home into a site of labor, and a patriarchal need for a man cave. In other words, no. But now, there was no one to say no. I spent all of Saturday clearing that room out. I neatly packed her things into boxes and stacked them against one wall. Then I went out and bought a simple, inexpensive desk and a comfortable chair. I spent the rest of the day assembling it, setting up my computer, my monitor, my lamp. By the end of the day, I had a functional, quiet little office. I sat at the new desk and looked out the window. It wasn't about having a man cave. It was about having a small piece of the apartment that was functional and designed for my needs. It felt incredible. It felt like I was reclaiming territory, not just physically, but mentally. The silence from Aisha's end was getting louder, if that makes any sense. I could feel the pressure building on her side of the line. She was used to being in control, to setting the terms of our interactions. My silence and my apparent happiness were taking that control away from her. I wasn't acting like a man who was lost without her. I wasn't acting like a man who was thinking about his behavior. I was acting like a man who had just been let out of jail, because, I was beginning to realize, I had been. I think it was around day 9 or 10 that the tone of her communication shifted again. The silence from my end was clearly not having the intended effect. Her strategy was based on the assumption that I was miserable, that every quiet moment in the apartment was a reminder of her absence, a testament to how much I needed her. She couldn't have been more wrong. Every quiet moment was a gift. She must have been checking my social media or getting reports from mutual friends. I don't know. I got a text late one night. It was a picture of the models on their shelf. She must have asked one of her friends who still followed me to screenshot it for her. The text that came with it was dripping with sarcasm. "I see you've used your time for introspection to bring back the war toys. Very mature." I almost laughed. It was so predictable. A week ago, a text like that would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Now, it just felt pathetic. A flailing attempt to find a pressure point, to get a reaction, any reaction. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked over to the shelf, picked up one of the planes, and just looked at it. I remembered the hours I'd spent on it, the focus it took, the quiet satisfaction of getting a tiny decal placed just right. It wasn't a war toy. It was a piece of my own history, a part of my personality she had tried to erase. Seeing it there on the shelf felt like a small victory for my own identity. A couple of days later, the real panic seemed to set in on her side. This was made clear by another message. This one wasn't about models or manspreading. It just said, "You know, my friends are telling me I should just block you and move on. They say your silence is a form of emotional abuse." That was a new one. My silence. My refusal to engage in her drama was now being framed as abuse. It was a masterclass in psychological projection. She was the one who had set the terms. She had initiated the separation. She had designed it as a punishment. And now that the punishment wasn't working, she was the victim. It was incredible, really. It was also the final piece of the puzzle for me. The last bit of doubt vanished. I had spent years twisting myself into knots, trying to be a good partner by her definition. It was a definition that was constantly changing, always designed to keep me on the back foot, always proving myself. I realized that there was no version of me that would ever be good enough. The problem wasn't my behavior. The problem was my compliance. My willingness to play the game had convinced her that I deserved to be treated this way. My newfound refusal to engage was a malfunction in her system. She couldn't compute it. That evening, I sat down at my new desk in my new office. I made 2 columns on a piece of paper. On one side, I wrote down all the things I had felt during our relationship: anxious, judged, drained, inadequate, small. On the other side, I wrote down how I'd felt for the last 12 days: calm, productive, relaxed, free, happy. The contrast was stark. It wasn't even a contest. It was a simple, logical conclusion. A mathematical proof. My life was measurably better without her in it. I folded the piece of paper and put it in the desk drawer. The decision was made. Not in anger, not in spite. It was made in the quiet, rational part of my brain that had been silenced for too long. I wasn't just going to survive her 15-day test. I was going to use it to end the experiment permanently. 2 days before she was due to come back, the 13th day, my phone rang. It wasn't a text this time. It was her name on the screen. A proper phone call. I hesitated for a moment. I knew this was going to be the final boss battle before the actual final boss battle. I took a deep breath and answered it. I just said, "Hello?" Her voice was completely different. The condescending tone was gone. The passive aggression was gone. It was replaced by this sugary, sweet voice I hadn't heard since we first started dating. It was jarring. She started by saying she missed me. I just said, "Okay." She said this whole thing was silly, that this experiment had gone on long enough and had proven its point. I stayed silent. She said she was ready to come home, that she could be back in an hour if I wanted. She was framing it as if she was doing me a favor, granting me an early pardon for my good behavior, or perhaps my bad behavior. It was hard to tell. I let her finish. When she was done, I just said, "We agreed on 15 days. The silence on her end was deafening. "What?" she finally managed to say, the sweetness in her voice cracking. "You said you needed 15 days, I repeated, my voice calm and even. "That's Sunday. Today is Friday. I'll see you on Sunday." I was using her own rules, her own logic, against her. I was enforcing the boundaries that she had established. It completely threw her. This was not part of her plan. Her plan involved her being in control of the timeline, of the reconciliation. She started to backpedal. She said it was just a number. That the important thing was that we both learned something. I told her that I was still learning, and that I needed the full 15 days to process everything, just like she said I did. I could hear the rising panic in her voice. "But what are you doing?" she asked, her voice getting thin. "What have you been doing this whole time?" "I've been thinking," I said, "just like you told me to." It was the honest truth. The conversation didn't last much longer after that. She tried a few more angles, but I remained a polite, unmoving wall of logic. I wasn't emotional. I was just factual. I was holding her to her own terms. She hung up, clearly frustrated and confused. As soon as the call ended, I knew what I had to do. I spent the rest of Friday evening and all of Saturday preparing. I went through the entire apartment, room by room. I gathered every single thing that belonged to her: her clothes from the closet, her makeup from the bathroom, her books from the coffee table, her laptop charger by the bed, the collection of empowering mugs in the kitchen cabinet, the weird, abstract art from the hallway that I always hated. I was careful and methodical. I wasn't angry. I felt like an archivist or an archaeologist, carefully removing the artifacts of a bygone era. I bought boxes from the hardware store, and packing tape, and bubble wrap for the fragile things. I packed everything neatly. I labeled the boxes with a black marker: clothes, bathroom, books, kitchen stuff. It was a strange process. Each item I packed away was like removing a single thread from a tapestry. With each thread removed, the picture became clearer. The picture was of my apartment, my home. By Saturday night, I was done. 6 large boxes were stacked neatly in the entryway. The apartment felt Spartan, empty, and completely, wonderfully mine. The coffee table was clear. The bathroom counter was clear. The bookshelves held only my books. I had erased nearly all physical evidence that she had ever lived there. I ordered myself a pizza. I ate it on the couch, watching a dumb action movie I knew she would have called problematic. I felt absolutely no guilt. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of finality, a sense of peace. I knew the next day would be difficult. There would be drama. There would be tears. There would be accusations. But I also knew that it would be the last day, the end of the story, and I was ready for it. Sunday arrived, the 15th day, Judgment Day. She had texted in the morning to say she would be there around noon. Her tone in the text was subdued, uncertain. "See you soon." I didn't reply. I spent the morning cleaning the apartment. Not a frantic, nervous cleaning. A calm, purposeful cleaning. Wiping down the counters, vacuuming the floors. It felt like preparing a space for a new beginning. At 5 minutes to noon, I took her key off the spare keyring. I walked over to the stack of boxes in the entryway and placed her key right on top of the box labeled books. Then I sat on the couch and waited. At exactly 12:03, I heard the key in the lock. The door opened. Aisha stepped inside, a hesitant, practiced smile on her face. She was probably rehearsing her "I forgive you" speech in her head. The smile vanished the second she saw the boxes. She just froze in the doorway, her handbag slipping from her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the neat stack of cardboard, then traveled up to the key sitting on top. She looked from the boxes to my face, her expression a mixture of utter shock and dawning horror. What is this?" she whispered. I stood up from the couch. I didn't walk towards her. I just stood my ground. "It's your things," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent room. "I packed them for you." It was like her brain couldn't process the words. She just kept staring. "What do you mean you packed them for me?" she asked, her voice starting to rise. "What is this supposed to be? Some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke," I said. "It's over, Aisha." The words just hung there. For a moment, she looked like a scared child. Then the shock wore off, and the anger kicked in. "You're breaking up with me?" she shrieked. "You're breaking up with me? I was the one who left. I was the one who gave you a chance to fix yourself." "You were," I agreed calmly. "And you were right about one thing. You said I needed the time to think, and I did. I've done a lot of thinking." I gestured around the empty-feeling apartment. "These last 15 days have been the calmest and happiest I've been in years," I told her. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a statement of fact. I realized we don't want the same things. More importantly, I realized that the person you want me to be is someone I have no interest in being. This set her off on a tirade. She called me a coward, said I was afraid of a strong woman, said I couldn't handle being challenged. She accused me of throwing away everything we had built. The old me would have argued, would have defended myself. The new me just stood there and let her burn herself out. Her words were like sparks from a fire, and I was made of stone. They just bounced off. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke again. "What did we build, Aisha?" I asked, my voice still even. An apartment where I had to hide my hobbies? A relationship where the way I sit on a couch is a political statement? I wasn't your partner. I was your project, and I'm done. Seeing her anger wasn't working, she switched tactics. The tears started. She told me she loved me, that she was only hard on me because she saw my potential. She said she could change, that she wouldn't be so critical. It was a good performance. I might have even believed it 2 weeks ago, but I had that piece of paper in my desk drawer. The 2 columns. Anxious versus calm. Drained versus happy. I knew that going back was not an option. It was a mathematical impossibility. "It's too late," I said. "This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time." I told her I had called a car for her, and it would be downstairs in 10 minutes. I offered to help her carry the boxes down. The offer of practical help seemed to enrage her more than anything else. It meant I was serious. It meant this wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction. She screamed at me one last time, a furious, desperate volley of insults and accusations. I just stood there, waiting. Finally, defeated, she grabbed her handbag. She took her key from the top of the box without looking at me. "I can't believe this," she muttered, shaking her head as she backed out the door. "You became everything you're supposed to hate." I wasn't sure what that even meant. She turned and walked away, not even bothering to slam the door. It just clicked shut behind her. I stood in the entryway for a full minute, just listening to the silence. Then I walked over, locked the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. A huge, shuddering breath escaped my lungs. A breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 years. It was done. It was finally, completely done. I walked back into my living room. My quiet, peaceful, empty living room. I picked up my phone. I opened my chat with Peter and Koa. "Operation Freedom is a go. The eagle has left the nest. Pizza's on me tonight."